The morning began like so many others in Amina's village, roosters crowing in the distance, the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the air, and the warm African sun peeking over the hills. She sat in the small yard outside her home, cradling her 3-month-old son, Malik. His tiny fingers curled around hers, and his eyes, bright and curious, seemed to study her face as though he were memorizing every detail. She kissed his forehead and whispered a silent promise to protect him for as long as she lived. But by midday, the air had changed. Shouts echoed from the far end of the village, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. The peaceful morning gave way to chaos as armed men poured into the streets. People scattered, some screaming, others running with only the clothes on their backs. Amina's heart pounded. She tightened her hold on Malik and began to run, her feet pounding against the dusty earth. She had almost reached the edge of the village when a sudden explosion threw her to the ground. Dust and smoke clouded her vision, and before she could regain her footing, a stampede of terrified villagers surged past her. In the confusion, a rough shove sent her sprawling. Her head struck a rock, and everything went dark. When she woke hours later, the world was silent except for the distant sound of crackling fires. Her arms were empty. Malik was gone. Panic gripped her chest. She searched the streets, her voice hoarse from calling his name, but there was no answer, only the heavy emptiness of a village that had been torn apart. The next morning, she began walking. She went from one refugee camp to another, from city to city, her eyes scanning every child's face. She asked strangers, soldiers, and aid workers if they had seen a baby with bright eyes and a patterned blanket. Every answer was the same, a slow, sorrowful shake of the head. Meanwhile, far away, Malik had been found by a relief volunteer, wailing among the ruins. The volunteer, unable to find his family in the chaos, took him to an orphanage in another region. There, he was given food, shelter, and a new life, but no one could tell him who his parents were or where he truly came from. As the years passed, he came to believe they had died in the war. Time moved forward, but for Amina, each day was shadowed by loss. Seasons changed. The war ended. Slowly, the land healed, but scars, both on the earth and in hearts, remained. She eventually settled in a quiet town and began working at a small clinic, tending to those who still bore the wounds of the past. She learned to laugh again, but there was always an ache in her chest. Every child's laughter was a reminder of the one she had lost. 15 years later, on a warm afternoon, a group of teenage volunteers arrived at the clinic to help with rebuilding efforts. Among them was a tall, kind-eyed boy with deep brown skin and a quiet manner. His name was Malik. From the moment she met him, Amina felt something stir inside her, a strange, unshakable pull. She noticed the way he smiled at patients, the patience in his voice, the way he seemed older than his years. But it was when he laughed that her breath caught. That laugh, it was a sound she thought she'd never hear again. Over the next few days, they spoke more. He told her he had grown up in an orphanage after the war, adopted by a family who had given him a good life. He had no memory of his birth parents. Amina's heart raced as an idea began to take root. One evening, she returned home and opened an old wooden box she kept under her bed. Inside, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a small, faded baby blanket, the one Malik had been wrapped in the day she lost him. It was the only piece of him she had left. The next day, she brought it to the clinic. When she showed it to Malik, his eyes widened in shock. I have this same pattern on my pillow at home, he said slowly. My adoptive mother told me it was all I had when they found me. Tears welled in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she whispered, Malik, you are my son. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then the boy, no, the young man, stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. Amina felt the weight of 15 years lift in that embrace. The world outside was still imperfect, still carrying the marks of violence and loss, but in that moment, she was whole again. From that day forward, Malik visited her often. They spent hours talking about the years they had missed, about the village where he was born, about the father he had never known. They cooked together, laughed together, and walked through the market side by side. They could not change the past, but they began writing a new future, one built not on loss, but on the joy of reunion. And under the quiet, peaceful sky that had once been torn by war, mother and son walked into the next chapter of their lives, together.